Today we're getting under the hood with Senator Lori Urso, a mother, grandmother, daughter, sister, and a Democrat representing District 8 Pawtucket in the Rhode Island Senate. She was elected in November 2024. Lori also serves as a secretary, Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, and is a member of the Senate Committee on Environment and Agriculture and on the Senate Committee on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies. Senator Urso brings a record of leadership and accomplishment in local government and the nonprofit sector. Since 2014, she has served as president and CEO of the Old Slater Mill Association, helping to preserve a valued national landmark, and operates the Slater Industrial Archives, a repository for Pawtucket history. Since 2015, she has served on the Rhode Island Historical Records Advisory Board and has co-chaired Pawtucket International Women's Day. She has served 9 years on the board of the Pawtucket Foundation and currently serves on the Pawtucket Riverfront Commission. Previously, Senator Urso worked in river and watershed conservation in Rhode Island, receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 1. Senator Urso holds a Master of Public Administration from the University of Rhode Island and a Bachelor of Arts from Rutgers University. She was a 2013 Rhode Island Foundation Leadership Fellow, and she served as a member of the Westerly Town Council from 2000 to 2002. Wow, welcome, Senator Urso.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. And thank you for saying Pawtucket so many times and saying it well.
Yay! That's always good. Well, I'm so happy to have you. It's season 4, Women's March for Mental Wellness, and everybody has a story. So I'm just really thrilled to be getting under the hood with you today.
Thank you. Likewise.
If it's okay, let's get going.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love this question. Everybody has inflection points. We're all on different journeys. What was the inflection point, Lori, that got you on this journey to be into mental health and wellness?
I think because we've talked about this before, that I passed a bill this year that is the first in the country to require workplace accommodations for women during the menopause transition or experiencing menopause. That to me was a really important mental health priority, because probably been 5 or 6 years ago now, I went through a period during the menopause transition where I was struggling to cope mentally and physically, to be able to work, to be able to relate to people. I wasn't getting the treatment that I needed. I was not getting the answers that I needed from doctors, and I was getting very frustrated. And I was mentally taxed at that time. And I was then, as I am now, the leader of the Old Slater Mill Association, which is a longtime nonprofit organization. And I had been with the organization by then for 7 years. But I got to a point I didn't feel like I could do the job anymore. I just didn't feel I had the capacity. I was struggling with so many issues. And I actually, at that time, tendered my resignation. And I knew that would be a big loss for the organization. And they were kind of confused about that. But I didn't feel like I didn't have the confidence in it. I'm sure it was all part of the same condition, but I had lacked the confidence to even talk to the members of the Board of Trustees about it, to explain, hey, I need help, I might need time. I just was too ashamed to do it. Looking back on that now, this many years later, and how I could have derailed my career that I had worked, I was almost 3 decades in nonprofit leadership. I just felt that in the Senate, I could make a difference in the lives of other women and try to provide a support system that helps women not only get through a difficult period for many of us, to understand what's happening to them, but also to not be afraid to ask for help and ask for accommodation so that they can stay in the workplace and achieve their highest levels and attain their highest grades of pay and prepare for retirement, and do so, with confidence and in a good place, both mentally and physically.
And really admire, because it's important. We all have stories. And I think your story really helped sort of ignite your desire to do this for other women. I'd love to go back and unpack a little bit of that story when you were feeling that and what ultimately, because you didn't end up leaving. I was part of that panel, so you didn't end up leaving. So I think it would be great to share with the audience the real human side of the experience and the sort of the pivot that happened in the process.
Yeah, I mean, started the menopause transition probably around age 47 or 48. It took a while before I realized what was happening. And that's strange because I have a biology degree. I was a health inspector. Like I should have known more about what was happening to me. And it just wasn't adding up. It was this collection of symptoms. It didn't make sense. I didn't know if it was heart issues, if it was mental issues. If I didn't know what issues, but it was a lot of issues. And it kind of started with cardiac issues that I couldn't get answers on and progressed. At one point, I had a moment of clarity where I thought, oh, this is hot flashes, because I would sit down and I was always very conscientious of my appearance. And I would sit down and do my makeup and do my hair. And then all of a sudden, I'd have this big sweat and then my hair would just fall flat. And it was so distressing to me. Like, why is this happening? And then sweating all night and having my sleep interrupted and not really sleeping well for probably 3 solid years, which really got me to that point where I was just not able to concentrate, irritable, couldn't relate to people. What I had told you when we did the panel with the Life in the Pause organization was the pandemic actually saved me, which is ironic when you think back and you're like, oh my God, the pandemic, it was so disruptive. But for me, I happened to give notice in early March. 2 weeks later, the governor of Rhode Island shut down the entire state. And I happened to be in the museum. I was operating a big museum complex at the time. And the museums were particularly hit hard. They all had to be shut down. And so all of our staff had to be laid off as a result of that. And it gave me an opportunity to go back to my board of trustees and say, you know what, this is, very different times than we've ever experienced. There were a lot of loose ends at the organization. I knew I was the only person who would be able to deal with those. So it allowed me to go back to work alone for a few months, collect my thoughts, have some time to breathe. And in that time, I was able to finally see, I think it was the third doctor I had seen who helped me get menopausal hormone therapy. And it was amazing. Like, it wasn't everything solved, but the real difficult situation finally started to loosen up a little. I was able to sleep. I was able to think. And by then I was more willing to talk about it, like with my husband, for example, who I was kind of keeping in the dark on the whole thing, like we tend to do. And it's funny, Elizabeth, because I think back to that time and how I was trying to just keep this whole thing to myself. I just was having a lot of anxiety. I didn't feel I could talk about it. And now I'm like all over everywhere talking about this and my personal experience. And it's quite freeing, actually. But really, in a matter of 5, 6 years, that whole thing has changed for me. And I'm really trying to be vocal and out front about this. And, the law that we passed doesn't really benefit me now. I'm postmenopausal. I don't have a lot of symptoms. And what I do have is being managed well. But it's really for the people, the women that are coming up behind me, right? That I want a cultural shift around this whole topic. I don't want it to be a moment, like you keep hearing menopause is having a moment, because that's the last thing we need is a moment. We need a major cultural change. We need this to be part of the dialogue, open dialogue from here forward so that we can have the quality of life that we deserve.
It's interesting that you just said that you're past it, yet you're doing the work for other women. And I think, not just that you're in that position because you're a political figure, that you have this responsibility, but as women, we have a social responsibility. If something happens to us and we can help the next woman, We have to do that. And so I applaud
Yeah.
that effort. I think it's great. And more importantly, just after that panel experience, I was just thinking about it. You got the first law passed in your state. And now, would you say how many states are adopting it?
Yeah, it's the first in the
In
country,
the country.
actually.
Sorry, in the country.
And
Apologies.
we
Thank you for
have,
correcting.
there are 8 states right now that are introducing some form of the bill that would provide workplace accommodations. A couple of them are more menstrual conditions, chronic menstrual conditions, but we could interpret those to include perimenopause, which certainly is related to our menstrual cycles. New York, New Jersey, we'll see it in Delaware soon. Michigan is very active now, the state of California. Maine passed a law this year that requires the health department to provide information. And I would hope that information could be passed on to employers as well. Because look, we spend a lot of our time at work. And at work is when we really need to be on, right? When we go home, we're a little more relaxed. We might have some downtime. Typically, we don't have that at work. So our performance matters and we want to perform well. Yeah, so I think has been something I know it is something that's been discussed for a long time. Certainly in the UK, they've put a lot of resources into menopause in the workplace. If you Google, or if anyone were to Google menopause workplace and hit news, and you can sort by date or not, you can see this is a dialogue around the globe. I mean, they're talking about it in India, in Asia, in Africa. It's everywhere, really. Australia is really having a lot of these dialogues. Of course, the UK, other parts of Europe. And so this is an important need because our workforce is aging, our population is aging. Have had fewer births for many decades. And so it's really critical that we protect our women workers at a time when they have, superior institutional knowledge and experience, and we're more educated now. Remember, in the baby boom generation, and I came along the end of the baby boom generation. The first half of that, many of the women weren't in the workforce. At that time, it was women at home, father goes out and, supports the family. And so it really was in the 60s and 70s, women were, becoming more conscious of a college education and careers. And so that generation kind of went through its own transformation in that sense. So what maybe wasn't an issue has become a real issue now. And, women often are behind the 8 ball after retirement because they've maybe taken time off for childcare. They've maybe taken time off to care for other relatives, or they've had these other career interruptions, and they're not as prepared for retirement. And that contributes also to the gender pay gap, these disruptions in our career. And so women live longer by all the data that we have on lifespan. And women are, if they're feeling forced to retire early, to take that Social Security check at age 62, for example, or not to contribute to their pension as long if they happen to be fortunate enough to have that, they're relying more on public assistance later in life. They may have to find subsidized housing. They can't stay in their homes. If you're on the $800 a month Social Security check, you're not able to afford a house or an apartment right now. So this is what we really need to change. And I think that'll be kind of the long-term benefit of this law. And I believe the other states recognize that as it's becoming harder and harder to afford living in America.
And thank you for educating and for sharing that data. I think it's really important. I go back to Lori. Lori, going through this experience and sharing
Yeah.
your story and having this experience sort of give you pause, not to go back to life in the pause, but give you pause to think about what's it all about, Alfie, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's it all about? And then coming back and saying, this is what I'm going to do. And so your one story, the impact, the ripple effect it's had has been just
Yeah.
tremendous. And so I want to go back and get to know Lori a bit more. I mean, you're an
Sure.
incredible senator. You're obviously an incredible advocate and you're a force of nature when you set your mind to something. But take us on a little bit of journey that got you here to being this person, this activist, if you will.
That's a good question. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, which is in a working class part of town. Italian immigrants. My great grandparents came from Italy. They had a challenged time here, with work and probably being illiterate, not being able to speak the English language. I'm a third generation American. My father was always involved in politics and public service. I can remember, I think I was 5 or 6 the first time I did a literature drop. He was running for city council in Providence, I think. And so we were out the night before the election doing a lit drop, and my mother was driving us around, and my brother and I were getting out of the car, and putting the flyers out. I was always at a rally for some candidate. It was just always part of my life. Whereas other people, they stay out of that and I was asking somebody this morning, oh, Providence had a city council, a special election today. And I said, oh, did you vote? He said he was from Providence. He's like, no. And I'm like, I just don't get involved in that. How can you not get involved in that? That just baffles me. So I've always been involved in that. And when I was younger, 25 years or so ago, even in college, I always aspired. I hope one day I can be like a mayor or something. I it was probably more of a fantasy, but I was in Westerly. I'd moved to Westerly, which is the southwestern part of the state after I got married. And I thought, well, I think I'll, make a run for the town council. And I won in my first shot. And so I had that experience being on the council, had a taste of some, not controversy in the illegal sense, but just being outspoken on issues that maybe the public would rather I wasn't outspoken on, but I felt important that I have a voice in some areas. So probably rubbed some people the wrong way once or twice. But I then had an opportunity to jump into the a race for state rep when the city merged 2 districts into one, and I jumped into a 3-way race. And as soon as I did that, it was a primary election. One of the candidates dropped out, and now I was in a 2-way race. And this person was, a sitting representative, and I was naive about when you have the backing of the leadership at the state house and you're, on the inside, how hard it is to run against an incumbent like that. And so it was a hard race and I lost it, but it was a good experience. I learned a lot. I met a lot of people, but still, it's very hard to lose an election. It's like a rejection, a public rejection. Why don't people like me? You're starting to question yourself. It's great to win an election, believe me, but losing an election really makes you think, is there something about me that people don't like? You don't think, oh, that guy had, the political machine behind him. It just was a hard thing to do. Still, you question yourself. And over the years, I was very involved in my career. I always had basically a leadership position from my early 20s. I think I became an executive director. It's just, I was just always very suited to that and that type of decision making. But I started to get involved in campaigns in Pawtucket with the mayor of Pawtucket, Don Grebian, and I was running his campaign. I was his campaign manager last election, and I was like deputy manager a couple of years before, and I helped a lot of the council and the school committee members get elected. And I just really enjoyed that, being part of, that process and putting good people in office. And then the opportunity to run for Senate came up, and I had all that experience behind me, right? Going back to being a kid and being involved in all of that. And some people wouldn't touch it. Like the thought of it, they can't even, it's too much that they just can't even conceive of it. But I said, well, I'm just going to go for it. And it was a strange circumstance, my running, because the sitting senator had to resign because she was offered a job in Washington. And so I had to kind of jump into the race at the last minute and do a lot of catch up. But again, because I had been out campaigning with other candidates, I was, people like, how do you start a campaign with no lead time? I said, I've been campaigning the whole time. I've been walking around the city. I've been doing events. I've been,
I love that.
setting up events. So it wasn't that big a stretch for me to make it happen, and I succeeded. So that gives me an opportunity now to be front and center on women's issues and things that benefit the community.
So talk about the women's issues. I mean, I love the fact that you are owning, the conversation around menopause. And as you said, it's not a moment. It's not a menopause moment. It's
Yeah.
here to stay. And you commented about the aging populations, there's fewer babies and what have you. I worked a lot in the aging population area, and they say that by 2030, there will be more people over 65 than under 18. So
Yeah.
that gives you a real, like, sort of sense of the lens.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, when you speak more broadly about women's issues, how are you thinking and what are you feeling?
Well, actually, in Rhode Island, we're already there, Elizabeth. We have more people over 65 in Rhode Island than we do under age 20 or less. So we have already shifted that balance. And in my community, we have a large population of older adults. So we just became an age-friendly community, Pawtucket. And so I've been starting to work on issues that affect that community, particularly trying to find ways to or add to the tools we have in the toolbox to keep seniors at home through loan modification programs and services in the home. I'm putting a bill in this next session that will allow foot care nurses to provide care to homebound people, things like that are fairly simple and that can really make a difference in people's lives, and trying to allow people to age at home. With women, there are, specific issues, but there are issues that affect all seniors. And, I think that this whole concept that we haven't really studied and researched women's health, and there's been a debate about this because there are now, advocacy groups that are putting forth that men's health needs to be, and I don't dispute that. I think men's health is as important as women's health. But as we're starting to learn more about women going through the menopause transition, the impact of declining estrogen and the systems in our body that affects, for example, our bone density. I mean, that's something that's going to impact women who live longer, who have gradual declines in their bone density, the cardiac aspects of it. I was listening to a cardiologist on another podcast recently, and she was saying that for women who have severe hot flashes, there's actually a visible thinning of the carotid artery. And so there's vascular changes that come along with that affect women. The symptoms associated with a heart attack in women, and how very different that is from a man's, and how most of the testing that we have and the criteria for that are based on really a man's health and not a woman's health. So, there are things like that I think we need to continue to look at in healthcare, and these distinctions and how we can provide the best care, the best testing, the ways that we can look at women's health to help them live longer and healthier lives. And again, that's not to say men's health isn't important, but that we've kind of overlooked those distinctions. I think research has always been tied more to the white male population. Yeah. And, there are a lot more diversity in how women and men are affected by health conditions, in various races and ethnicities. So we need to be open to all of that, I feel, and how we can improve that.
But I think what's interesting is your comment was in 1993, up until 1993, research was only about the white male. So every drug that was created, and a lot of them are still the gold standards, are being given to women, assuming that women weigh the same, or, that they have the same physiology, if you will. And so I think it's interesting with that. I'm kind of curious because I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying. Are you able to impact that in ways?
Well, I sit on the Health and Human Services Committee. So any of the bills that come through there, I have an opportunity to speak on, to be part of the debate, the public hearings. I introduce bills to that committee. Last year, I introduced bills that had to do with pharmacy choice, pharmacy benefit managers, how to get the cost of prescription drugs lower. I introduced a bill that had to do with reviews of medications in the midst of opioid treatment and how to streamline that so we're not interrupting care for those with substance use disorders. I put in a bill in Rhode Island. We have a real primary care crisis, probably other places in the country, but in Rhode Island, we have a lower Medicaid reimbursement rate, and doctors are migrating out of the state to Massachusetts or Connecticut, where they make more in reimbursement rate. So I passed a bill last year that facilitated licensure for internationally trained doctors so that instead of having to return to medical school and repeat a residency, if a doctor has been practicing licensed for 3 years and is in Rhode Island, he or she can actually practice in community health centers in lieu of repeating a residency. So there's a partial licensure and more of an observational practice to try to, help get more doctors working, particularly in the underserved communities. So those are the types of initiatives that I've been working on. And, I co-sponsor a lot of bills as well. We had bills on pre-authorizations, which really make continuity of care or just access to care difficult. We passed a bill that allowed hairstylists and manicurists to go to the homes of those with sensory issues so they can get haircuts and have their nails trimmed and, things like that. Really good progressive measures that serve our citizens. And I have a front seat to that, which is nice.
So interesting. It's like the professional, the politician, at the same time, the human. Like the
Yeah.
things that you're bringing forward are very meaningful things to humanity.
Mhm.
And so, and that's got to be who you are as a human, right? Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about,
Right.
because, here's the business side of you doing all these things. You're accessible to the people in Rhode Island, but then there's the human side. So share a
Yeah.
little bit about the human, Lori.
Relative to that, I would say that just like everybody else, I have issues that I deal with family relationships, family estrangement is an issue. And I meet so many people now who are estranged from one or more of their family members and how that, impacts them for bad or good. I have dealt with one of my children had opioid use disorder that is now recovered, but I lost two nephews. Two of my nephews died from opioid overdoses. And things like that really affect you, and how you view the world and how you want to make a difference. This year, I'm going to, because I'm also on the Senate Committee on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies, I'm going to put in a couple of bills that deal specifically with the use of AI in mental health. One being just to kind of check mental health counselors on their use of AI and their direct use of AI chatbots in treating patients, and just to put up some guardrails to make sure that if AI is being used in mental health counseling, that there are limitations on that and there is human oversight, either if it's being used for diagnosis, treatment, data management, etc., that those things be very clear. And also, I'm introducing a bill that will put up guardrails on how a chatbot responds to suicidal ideation. if someone is talking about suicide, that it will stop the chat, that it will refer people to suicide helplines, that it'll be very clear
That's
if
interesting.
someone is on a chatbot platform that there'll be warnings or, very clear graphics that say this is not a human being, this is an artificial, because we're seeing that with adults and children who are with the chatbots, they're sycophant. Their behavior is they behave as sycophants and they latch on to what you're saying and they reinforce it. And we've seen this with both young children and older adults who are, being led down the road when they're in a vulnerable state. Now, I know 46 or so attorneys general did write to the developers of AI systems about protecting children. And I had thought about, should I introduce a bill that was related specifically to children? But we're seeing this even with adults. In Rhode Island, we have a really great 988 line, suicide hotline. We have the best answer rate in the country. I think it's 1.8 seconds. And so this is an important policy area for us. And as I said, having experienced, the two suicides of young nephews of mine, one was a veteran. He had struggled after he came back from Afghanistan. One was a 40-year-old financial advisor. He was working in California. He just seemed to have everything, had a great life, single life, very dynamic, but he obviously had some demons, that led him down this road. And I know he had gone through a period of depression. So we don't want people in those mindsets, states of mind, to have access to systems that could fuel their mental health crisis.
I really appreciate that. My family's been touched deeply by mental health, so I can really appreciate that. And I think at the end of the day, you really do need that human on the other side, that human
Yes.
contact, because often those people who are struggling with whatever it may be, it's the isolation that brings them further and further away. And so,
Yes.
yeah, thank you for doing that work. That's so important.
Mhm.
I'm going to shift a little to the march, how you're marching for mental wellness. This is about you, how you do. Of course, we've heard about what you're doing professionally, but how are you
Yeah.
marching for mental wellness?
My own mental wellness or the world's mental wellness?
Well, you can answer both. Why don't you start with you? Why don't we give macro,
Yeah.
micro, or
Well,
micro,
for
macro?
myself, I, try to practice mindfulness when I can. I try to focus on the positive. In the past, I've probably been more often than I'd like to kind of dialed into the negative, and I try to see things more in a positive light. I try to be there for my friends, both to be supportive of them, but when you're doing that, you get your own support. I have some really good friends that I've been, that I've had in my life for decades. And it's so great to have them there for you and to be there for them. And as you said, isolation is a real risk, particularly as you get older. So I try to maintain and nurture the really good relationships in my life. And over the years, I've shed many relationships because I'm at the point now where I have kind of culled through and I'm, recognize who the good people are and the people that really care about me and have my best interest at heart. I try to, with my younger cousins, for example, my sister's 10 years younger than I am. I have a cousin who's 9 years younger and a couple of, and, as soon as I realized and went through my crisis through the menopause transition, I immediately started to contact everybody close to me who was approaching that age and said, look, you really need to be prepared for this. This is going to come on subtly. And this is what and the why, and have the right questions for the doctors and, find the doctor that will help you. So, I try to pass on that wisdom when somebody's open to it and if I believe it will be helpful. And then in the mental health of the greater good, let's say, I try to support efforts to provide services to people who could be vulnerable. We talked about 988. I've worked on other mental health bills. I try to stay knowledgeable, because I'm not an expert on everything. So every time I have an opportunity to learn, to listen, even with the menopause transition issues, I've been dialed in now quite because I'm asked to speak on this subject so much. I've been listening to the experts, the certified menopause practitioners. I've been listening to a lot of webinars, podcasts, video things to hear. As I said, I was listening to a cardiologist speak recently on a podcast and, just trying to keep myself informed and up to date on the dialogue so that can inform what I do to try to help. So that helps me, and it ultimately, I hope, will help the greater community by my being not only in the position I'm in, but having that knowledge and knowing, how we can keep everybody well and nurture a positive mental health community. That's how I'm marching forward.
Well, boy, you're paying so much forward as you march forward for mental wellness. Do you feel, I'm just kind of curious as well, do you feel like this is something, because you've had personal experiences, when you're touched that deeply by something,
Yeah.
we run to the roar as human beings. Do you feel like that was something in your nature prior to having your personal experiences? Because you were doing so much good is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I was probably always one of the friends that people came to talk to. I'm a good listener, I guess. I'm empathetic. Even now, I sometimes say to my husband, oh, I'm like the counselor of everybody. People are just calling me and I'm not certainly the expert on everything, but I guess I can give good objective advice at times, help people to look at different sides. Like just yesterday, I was with a leader of one of our substance abuse care centers, and she and I had been working on a bill last time and last session, and we were going to put the bill in again. And I was like, well, let's look at some of the opposition letters that we received. And so we're reading those, and she's getting all hot under the collar. And I said, look, you have to keep the perspective on this. Some of these people, it's their job to be against a bill like this. They might be part of a health insurance company or, whatever their perspective is, it's their job to be against it. So don't take it personally. She's like, well, I'm saying that it's not a personal thing about you. It's just they're in a position and they have a responsibility to, represent that point of view. We're representing this point of view. And so keep your composure, look at both sides, try to understand where they're coming from, and then we can have a dialogue with compromise. But if you get your heart rate all up and you're feeling, really personally offended, you're not going to be able to have a meaningful or helpful conversation about it. And I'm always trying to get people, years ago, I was working with the League of Women Voters. This was early in my career. And I went to a conference and there was a session on the book. I think it was called Getting to Yes. It was a book on negotiation. I learned so much from that about, when you're entering a dialogue or a negotiation, try to think of what is motivating the other side. Stop for a minute and think about where they're coming from and have that in your mind as you're approaching the situation, what you think their goals are, what you think they're trying to get out of that. And that's really important in the business of, passing legislation and finding compromise. And you don't always win everything, like you put in a bill and you end up having to cut 3 things out of 6 of the bill, but you're making incremental progress. It doesn't preclude you from maybe later going back and trying to make these other changes. That's what the next session, there's always another session. So you make incremental change. And as long as you're marching forward toward your ultimate goal, be happy with that. Be satisfied with that. Don't find that as a point of failure. That's a point of progress, right? So just try to view things in a different perspective that, continues to lead you to your ultimate goal.
It's really good advice on a personal level. And I love this last question, which is this is your platform today. And you have so many platforms, but this is your platform on Under the Sisterhood to give a message to women of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all cultures. Senator Urso, what do you want to leave them with?
I think it's important for women to understand that there really are no barriers to achieving the goals that you want to achieve. There might be little obstacles along the way. You may get knocked down. You may feel, of course, we all suffer with imposter syndrome at times and lack of confidence at times, but you just have to be open to what the universe delivers to you. I've found that to be true all through my life. I've never been so rigid that I wasn't open to an opportunity that the universe wanted to deliver, and to accept that and understand why and see where that leads. And those are sometimes your best opportunity. You may not even know. I always tell this to the college students or the students going to college. Don't be so rigid when you get in that you've decided your major is X and that's what it is. Like, you're going to be open to so many new possibilities. Take advantage of that and be open and let life take you to a path ultimately to fulfillment. And I think, women, I feel like this issue with menopause and how it comes on at a point in life that can be disruptive, where we're confused, maybe our mind, our bodies are going through things, and we want to try to persevere through that. Don't look at that as your end point, right? Find the treatment that you need, find support in other women, and women, please support women. Okay, that's really important, that women support women. Don't look down on women. Don't call them crazy. You don't understand it. Be there for other women, because collectively we can really overcome. And there's so much room to grow for women. Like, we know right now, there's only 10% women in CEO positions right now in this country. And it's no coincidence, right? Because you get to an age where you're ready to advance in leadership and you're confronted with these transitional symptoms that menopause and other things can bring. But we can persevere through that, and we can elevate those numbers and become more part of, leadership in this country and the conversations around it. So that's my advice, is just, you can achieve and attain anything you want. Be open, be fluid, and keep your heart open. And, that's your best bet.
I was going to comment, but I think the through line of being open, life's a journey, right? But I think that you're right. Menopause is not an end point. It's something we have to live through and do. But in many ways, like, if we are treated and handle and get the support we need, that's like a pivotal time in our lives where we should be in CEO roles. We
Yes.
shouldn't be stopped by that. So thank you for that. I know that's getting into a little details, and thank you so much, Senator Urso, for getting under the hood with me today. You are doing amazing work on behalf of your community, your state, but also women.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure, my honor to do it.
Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Matt Butler, and edited by Matt Butler. The music is by Ayla Schaefer. Her song, Rose.